If I was to ask you to name a haunted hotel, I'm guessing you would probably say the Stanley Hotel, or maybe even the Cecile Hotel, or at a push, maybe the Lizzie Borden Bed and Breakfast. But today, I'm going to tell you about a hotel which was demolished way back in 1969, and I think it rivals all of those I've just mentioned. And its name? The Birkdale Palace Hotel in Southport. The hotel was built over 20 acres of land and stood over 200 feet long on the Birkdale shore. With 1,000 rooms and just over 200 bedrooms and suites, it really was something to be proud of in the upcoming seaside town of Southport. In 1881, the hotel was refurbished and extended to include its very own health hydro establishment. A variety of baths were installed with water that flowed directly from the sea, and electric lighting was installed powered by a steam-powered generator. By 1939, after many years of struggle, the hotel had finally become a popular destination for holidaymakers coming to Southport, for people visiting from far and wide. In 1942, the hotel was used by the American Red Cross and used as a rest and recreation home for American Air Force pilots. The hotel boasted its very own railway line and later on in its life was given its very own runway for light aircrafts. This grand hotel welcomed some very famous guests, including Clark Gable and Frank Sinatra, and even the Beatles, who performed there in 1962. But unfortunately, in the 1960s, the hotel ran into financial difficulties and was eventually closed. For a time, it was actually used as a movie set for numerous horror movies such as The Sorcerers, starring Boris Karloff, What's Good for the Goose, starring Norman Wisdom, and The Haunted House of Horror, starring Frankie Avalon, as well as others. Many thought that this grand hotel would one day surely reopen and continue its stunning reputation. But many believe that the financial difficulties and the decline in the hotel's popularity is down to the very sad fact that a little girl was murdered in one of the rooms of the Palace Hotel, and many believe this is the sole reason why the Palace Hotel was eventually demolished. In 1961, a 6-year-old little girl named Amanda Jane Graham asked her mother if she could go to Southport Fun Fair with her friends. Her mother agreed and off little Amanda went. It would be the last time that her mother would ever see her alive. And there Amanda stayed all day playing with her friends. From evidence gathered, it would seem that young Amanda stayed at the fun fair till about 7 p.m. and then she boarded a bus with her friends. Also on board the bus was 33-year-old Alan Victor Mills, who was a porter at the Palace Hotel. Amanda's stop was one stop before her friends, and when she disembarked, so did the hotel porter, and it would seem that he befriended her. Witness reports told her they were seen holding hands and talking, and the little girl seemed perfectly happy and carefree as she walked with the strange man. Apparently by 10 p.m, the porter and little Amanda were still walking around the streets of Southport hand in hand. It was about this time that a schoolgirl who knew Amanda bumped into the pair and asked Amanda why she wasn't at home. The hotel porter told the girl that he was about to take her home, and they both headed off in the right direction, although it wasn't the destination he had in mind. The hotel porter Wills had gained the little girl's trust and took her back to his hotel room. When they were there, he inflicted a brutal sexual assault and then wrapped his hands around the little girl's tiny neck and strangled her to death. Wills claimed that when he woke the next morning, he saw little Amanda's dead body on his bed and had no recollection of how the murder happened. In a panic, Wills stuffed Amanda's little body under his bed and covered her up with his own dirty clothes. Wills was described as a man with the mind of an 11-year-old. He stood at 5 foot 3 inches tall, and he had a crooked nose and one arm was shorter than the other, and he was covered with tattoos. Wills did attempt to go on the run, but it didn't take police long to track him down, arrest him, lock him up, and throw away the key. Wills would later claim that he had no recollection of the murder due to him being extremely drunk after coming from the Fisherman's Rest pub, the now only remaining part of the hotel, which we will get to a little bit later in this episode. And this is where the ghost stories start to crop up. Apparently, over the years after the murder, the little girl's spirit was seen by many chambermaids and guests of the hotel, peeking around corners and the hallways. And strangely enough, the room that she was murdered in mysteriously caught on fire and was totally destroyed. So like I said, little Amanda's ghosts have been seen quite a few times, but that's not the only ghosts that have been seen in the Palace Hotel. There was another rumour that two sisters actually committed suicide together in some bizarre suicide pact. And then there's a story of the architect who committed suicide by throwing himself down the elevator shaft after finding out that he built the hotel the wrong way round. You see, apparently the hotel was supposed to face the seafront, but according to legend, the architect somehow got it wrong and built the hotel the wrong way round. Legend has it that in the dead of night when the hotel slept, the elevator liked to make its way from floor to floor without anybody operating it, and many believe it was a spirit of the dead architect who liked to take the lift for a ride every now and again. Now I will say that this has been debunked due to the original architect of the hotel dying of consumption in his own home. Although it was debunked, it didn't stop the strange stories of the ghostly elevator operator from being told. And perhaps the most famous stories came from when the hotel was being demolished. Many workmen actually witnessed the strange behaviour of this old elevator. Apparently it went from floor to floor of its own accord, which the workmen simply put down to a fault in the electrics. And so to stop this, they turned off the power to the elevator and put the brakes on. Surely now, the elevator would not move. The elevator was still going up and down the lift shaft. The only way to do this was by using the elevator's hand crank, which would have been used before the hotel had electricity. The hotel operator would have wound the crank up and the elevator would have moved up and down the shaft. And so they removed that too, but it didn't stop the elevator from making its journeys from floor to floor. And so the workmen became so unnerved by this that they decided to cut the elevator loose and let it plummet to the ground. But it didn't, it simply stayed in place. It was almost as though the hotel was fighting back against being demolished. But the workmen were persistent, and they got the hammers and they hammered the top of the lift until it finally gave way and plummeted straight down into the basement and crashed into the bowels of the hotel. And of course that did put an end to the lift making its way from floor to floor in the dead of night, although that would not be the last of the strange events that would happen in the hotel that was witnessed by the workmen. Now, whilst the men were demolishing the hotel from the inside out, there were still parts of the hotel that were still okay to sleep in. There were still some rooms that were still standing and perfectly fine to stay in. And this is what some of the men did overnight. Instead of travelling back home, they would simply stay in these rooms that were still standing. Apparently, at the end of a hard working day when the men would retire to bed and try to get some sleep, the hotel would really wake up. On many occasions, workmen claimed that they could hear disembodied voices coming from the many rooms of the hotel, and from time to time they also could hear the sounds of an angry couple arguing from somewhere in the hotel. And to top all this off, they also could hear a woman's stilettos walking around in the dead of night. But here's the thing, there was no one in the hotel but the workmen. At this point, the hotel was completely empty. And when morning finally did approach, many of the workmen often found themselves locked inside their own rooms, unable to leave until they were freed by their friends. Now, we've been through many reasons why the hotel may have been haunted, and the ghost of young Amanda is one of them, which is a strong possibility, and we know it actually did happen, that is a fact. But some of the other legends that surround the hotel are a bit dubious and, more than likely, fictional. And then there's the fact that 14 dead bodies were held in the coach house of the hotel after a horrible tragedy took place. And this tragedy took place on the 9th of December 1886. On that night, 27 lifeboatmen lost their lives after trying to save the crew of a German bark called the Mexico. On that fateful night, 2 lifeboats were dispatched. Only 2 lifeboatmen survived after their lifeboats capsized and the men became stuck underneath the boats and drowned. A 3rd lifeboat was eventually sent out and they successfully saved all 12 members of the Mexico ship. The dead bodies that were recovered from the sea and the beaches around Southport were taken to the hotel's coach house that was used as a temporary mortuary, and the bodies were laid out inside. And that very same coach house would later be converted into a pub called the Fisherman's Rest, which is still there to this very day and is the only remaining part of the hotel that is still standing. It is said that the 14 crew members of the lifeboats haunt the Fisherman's Pub. And apparently it's not only the lifeboat men that haunt the Fisherman's Rest pub. The little girl Amanda, who was murdered by the porter, has also been seen in the pub by customers and staff alike. If you were to pay the Fisherman's Rest a visit, the first thing you would notice as you walk through the door is the bar area. Carved into the wooden bar are 14 mermaids. Each mermaid represents each of the lost souls of the lifeboat men. The name The Fisherman's Rest is a fitting tribute to the 14 members of the lifeboat crew who lost their lives at sea on that fateful night. So what do you think? Was the Palace Hotel really haunted, or was it just the over-imagination of the people of Southport? As usual, I'll let you decide. Take care.